Manchester United's 5-2-3 defensive setup in the middle third has issues in coordination between all three lines of the defensive shape, which leads to the front three being bypassed too easily, the man-to-man pressing midfield double pivot being overloaded, whilst the zonal and often static back three seems to cause more issues than solutions with the midfield double pivot in front of them. On first glance, it could look like laziness or just a lack of positional discipline, or Bruno tracing back and vacating central areas. The easy answer is just to blame the players, but the issue isn't even individual players, it's the structure as a whole. The defensive and pressing shape just in general puts too much responsibility on the midfield double pivot to cover an enormous amount of ground. But the question is, where exactly is the pressing and defensive shape going wrong? Well, I'm going to be answering it in three main parts. Firstly, how does the front line get played through? Secondly, why can't the midfield cope? And thirdly, how does the back line's positional rigidity make things even worse? And so by the end of the video, I think you'll see that this isn't about work rate or effort or positional discipline. There are inherent tactical flaws in United's defensive and pressing shapes. But before I go any further, if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to okjersey.com. They've got retro jerseys like this Manchester United home shirt from 1986 to 1988 and this 1990-92 away jersey from the League Cup final, both available for under $23. And they've also got a variety of new season and other retro jerseys from other club and international sides as well. They sent me over these alternative new season Manchester United jerseys, as well as this Manchester United home shirt from the 92-93 season with Cantona 7 on the back. If you use code Atlantis at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount, so I'll leave it linked in the description and in the comments section below. So here we see as Bernd Leno's throwing the ball out to Calvin Bassey that United's front line is completely detached from the defensive and midfield lines behind, meaning that Mbeumo is essentially pressing on his own, and so he's easily bypassed by Bassey, and now when the ball's played into Sander Berg, he has the space in front to easily carry the ball into the middle third. And it's this sort of disjointed press which makes attacking players look lazy. Cunha and Mbeumo can't be constantly sprinting around, stopping, accelerating and competing in physical duels for 90 minutes straight, consistently time after time. If Cunha here was Rashford or Garnacho, then this would have been clipped up as evidence of laziness and how it's the player's commitment that is the issue, when in reality it's the pressing system which is the issue, specifically the use of only a two-man central midfield. Cunha isn't the issue, Bruno isn't the issue is using a pressing and defensive shape where the midfield double pivot are simultaneously expected to man-to-man press the opposition's midfielders in the half space between the lines behind them, Lukic and King in this example, whilst the back three are positioned behind, following more of a zonal positional style, where they don't have to follow their designated players beyond the midfield line ahead, which is evidently going to lead to these type of overload situations where Iwobi floats in from an initial wider position into the area between Casemiro and Bruno, who have been stretched having to follow their players, from where it's now a 3v2 in the centre in Fulham's favour, despite there being a 3v1 advantage with United's three centre-backs against Meunier maybe 10 or 15 yards deeper. So United have been completely played through the centre of their midfield, yet somehow United's lack of organisation and seeming confusion about where the man-to-man pressing ends and the zonal marking starts leads to Shaw getting dragged over with Meunier into a central area, despite it basically being a 3v1, and so it opens up space between Shaw and Dorgu for Sasha Lukic to make a third man run from deep off of the blind side of Bruno Fernandes into. But Iwobi's dink over Shaw has too much bend on it, which allows Dorgu to make the interception. However, Dorgu lacks composure in this situation. Ideally, he brings the ball down on his chest and finds a pass into Bruno Fernandes, but given that he is under a bit of pressure, he at least has to find a header into the path of either Bruno or Mount. However, despite this, he heads the ball between Bruno and Mount, allowing Iwobi to make the interception. And now, as Fulham have the ball on this right side with Castagna, this is where we can once again see the issue of using just a midfield double pivot in a back three system where the back three aren't operating in as strict a man-to-man pressing style as the midfield double pivot ahead of them. And so once again United have spare players in the forward line ahead and the defensive line behind whilst being overloaded in the centre. This is the issue. See, in this situation Dorgu moves out to close down Castagna, but the United back line doesn't shift across accordingly, with Luke Shaw surely having to come across here and take up a position that resembles a left back in a back four, but instead the back three remain central, despite having a 3v1 advantage, whilst Bruno Fernandes has a 2v1 in this right-sided half space in front of Shaw. And so rather than holding a central position on Sasha Lukic and having Luke Shaw moving across to close down the space in behind Dorgu as he's moved out, Bruno Fernandes is the one who's forced to track Iwobi's underlapping run down the channel in order to prevent a 2v1 developing against Dorgu, which in turn stretches the space between him and Casemiro, who for some reason is sucked into Munez's orbit, not moving over with Bruno Fernandes and instead deciding to retain a central area. And so this means that Lukic becomes a free man, and when he receives the ball and turns, Luke Shaw is still in the back line because really he should have been the player moving wide, allowing Bruno to retain a central position to stop Lukic being able to turn in the first place. And it's only after Lukic has switched play out to King in a central area with space out to his left side that Cunha and Mbeumo are now able to get back into the picture, with Mount on this near side also seeing all three players ahead of the ball. The 3-4-3, 5-2-3 pressing and defensive shapes in the middle third puts immense pressure on the midfield double pivot, not just to cover a vast amount of ground both vertically and horizontally, but also when it comes to having to regularly deal with being overloaded 2v1 or 3v2 in the centre of the pitch, in all thirds of the pitch. It's just far too easy at the moment to bypass United's front three, to the point where I can't really understand what the benefit is of using a 5-2-3 defensive shape in the middle third as opposed to a 5-3-2, because not only does the use of a front three actually make it easier for the opposition to play through than a front two would, but a midfield double pivot are not only forced to constantly be sprinting forward, backwards, out to the channels and back inside, but because the three centre-backs don't follow their designated players into the midfield, Bruno and Casemiro are frequently overloaded, as they are here, with Joachim Andersen splitting the front three with almost no resistance, but Bruno actually does exceptionally well behind. On his toes he's able to burst out and apply the pressure on Lukic's first touch, forcing him backwards, but after this Lukic simply drifts wide and deep, forcing Bruno out of that central area, stretching the space between him and Casemiro, who is now man-to-man pressing Iwobi all the way over in the left-sided half space, with King now able to become the free man moving into the vacant area as Euro doesn't follow his movement deeper, wherefrom it's pretty simple to open up the passing lane with Anderson finding his feet, and now Luke Shaw is eventually forced to move out of the back line, but 2 or 3 seconds too late, only after King has received the ball on his back foot and is now facing goal. And Bruno Fernandes is in another 2v1, as whilst he has been drawn high with Lukic, Tete at right back is now able to make a run off of the back of Bruno and Mount, and is now able to receive a pass that splits Shaw and Bruno, setting up a position where Dorgu is now in a 2v1 down Fulham's right side. And really they should work this far better. Tete should manage the situation better, playing the pass into Castagna's feet and setting up a 2v1 where he can then look to burst ahead on the overlap instead of doing what he does, which is play the pass in front of Castagna, forcing him into a 1v1 against Dorgu, which certainly isn't his specialty. And so in this move, Fulham were able to advance the ball through the centre of the pitch and then down their right side, United's left, using overloads the whole way. Yet even when Castagna's early cross drifts all the way over to the other side of the pitch, Fulham once again have a 2v1 against Ahmad on United's right side as well, and when Iwobi releases Sessegnon with a well-timed and weighted reverse pass, setting up the first-time cross, you can see that Castagna has managed to run off the back of Dorgu to get goal side, and had Sessegnon's low cross been set out further away from Euro with more curl on the ball, there's a good chance that Castagna would have had a tap-in at the back post, showing that despite people saying that Dalot is the one who isn't good enough defensively, and that Amorim prefers to have at least one fullback in the wing-back positions, primarily for defensive purposes, Dorgu isn't exactly defensively secure in all situations, and often can be quite positionally lax at the back post, and so whilst he's superior defensive ability overall, compared to more of a winger like a Diego Moreira or an Ahmad, could be considered a slight benefit, I just don't think it's worth the reduced 1v1 dribbling or crossing ability that using more of a winger in the left wing-back position would provide in the final third. But even still, that's a secondary issue compared with the confusing mix of a man-to-man press and zonal positioning, which is leaving the midfield double pivot completely overwhelmed, and would still be a significant issue even if you did replace one of Bruno or Casemiro with one of Ederson or Baleba. It's just that either Baleba or Ederson would be better at papering over the cracks and bailing United out in certain situations that they would otherwise get exploited in. But in the end, United's 5-3-2 defensive shape fails because it creates more problems than it solves. The front three are easily bypassed, the midfield double pivot seem to be constantly at a massive disadvantage, and so whoever is playing there is going to struggle. The double pivot are just too overworked in terms of the ground they've got to cover, at the speed they've got to cover it, and the back three remain too rigid, not wanting to be as strict with their man-to-man press as the midfield double pivot in front, which leads to a disjointed mix of man-to-man pressing and zonal marking, which doesn't just expose Bruno Fernandes and Casemiro, it leaves them in almost impossible situations where they are constantly being stretched and overloaded. What initially may look like a lack of effort or positional ill discipline from the likes of Cunha and Mbeumo or Bruno Fernandes is actually a structural flaw in the actual defensive setup. And so to answer the question, the main issue with United's 5-3-2 defensively is that it disconnects the team, overburdens the midfield double pivot, and allows the opponent to progress the ball through central areas with very little resistance. It's not about the individual player's commitment, it's about the system that sets the players up to fail by frequently exposing them to situations where they're at the disadvantage. So let me know what you think of my analysis in the comment section below, and if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to okjersey.com. You can use code Atlantis at checkout for a discount, so I'll leave it linked in the description and in the comments section below.